4 cabins, 4 methods, 24 hours. No electricity. No fans. No air conditioning. Just physics and a thermometer in each room. By the next morning, one method had dropped the starting temperature by nearly 9 degrees Fahrenheit. Another barely moved the needle. And the one the internet calls the most reliable passive strategy finished last. Here are the actual numbers. Before we talk about what worked, let me tell you what we were testing. 4 cabins, same square footage, same orientation, same wall construction, same insulation value, same roof pitch. The only variable was the cooling strategy installed in each one. Cabin 1 had cross ventilation only. 2 openings, one on the windward side, one on the leeward side, sized correctly, positioned correctly, with nothing blocking the path. The textbook setup. Exactly what every guide recommends. Cabin 2 had night flush ventilation. Large openings that could be opened wide after sunset and closed before the heat of the morning started building. Operated manually. On a schedule. Cabin 3 had exposed thermal mass. Concrete floor. Stone interior wall on the north face. The idea being that all that mass would absorb heat during the day and release it slowly, keeping the swing manageable. Cabin 4 had shading plus a ventilated cavity on the roof. Deep overhang blocking direct sun from hitting the walls after 10 in the morning, and an air gap between the outer roofing and the interior ceiling, letting heat escape before it ever entered the structure. Now, the variables we controlled. All 4 cabins started the test at the same baseline. 68 degrees Fahrenheit at 6 in the morning. Same outdoor conditions throughout the day. No wind variation beyond what the site naturally provided. No internal heat sources, no cooking, no occupants during the measurement period. The variable we left free was operation, meaning, if a method required human action to work, opening a window at a specific time, closing it before the heat entered, that action was taken as designed. That counts as part of the method. Why? Because a passive cooling method that requires perfect operation to deliver its result is not the same as one that works without you thinking about it. That distinction is one of the things the results will show clearly. Let me walk you through what each method actually does before we get to the numbers. Cabin 1, cross ventilation, works on pressure differential. Wind hits the windward opening, creates a slight positive pressure inside the room, and pushes air out through the leeward opening. The air moves, and moving air carries heat with it. It also increases perceived comfort even when the actual temperature hasn't changed much, because air movement accelerates the body's cooling response. The problem with cross-ventilation alone is that it's reactive. It doesn't cool the structure. It cools the air inside the structure while air is moving. The moment the wind drops, or the window's close, or the structure returns to ambient. Cabin 2, night flush, works on a completely different principle. It's not trying to cool the air. It's trying to cool the mass. At night, outdoor temperatures drop, sometimes significantly. If you open the structure wide during those cooler hours, you let the cool air flush through and lower the temperature of the walls, floor, and ceiling themselves. When you close the building before the morning heat begins to build, you've pre-cooled the thermal envelope. The room starts the day colder than it would otherwise, and it takes longer to heat up. The method doesn't fight the day. It prepares for it. Cabin 3, exposed thermal mass, works because dense materials absorb heat slowly. Where a thin wall might heat up and transfer that heat indoors within an hour, a thick concrete floor or stone. Wall takes 4, 5, 6 hours to reach thermal equilibrium. The heat enters, but it enters slowly. And at night, when the mass releases that stored heat back, it dissipates into the cooler outdoor air instead of building up inside. The problem with thermal mass alone is that it requires a temperature swing to be useful. In a climate where nights stay warm, the mass releases heat indoors, making things worse. And without ventilation to help discharge the stored heat, the mass starts the next day already loaded. Cabin 4, shading plus ventilated cavity, attacks the problem before it enters the building. The overhang blocks direct solar radiation from hitting the wall surface. The ventilated cavity under the roof creates a channel where hot air between the outer roof and the interior ceiling rises and exits through the ridge before it can conduct inward. This method is invisible when it works. You don't see it operating. You just notice that the walls feel cooler than you'd expect. 6 a.m., all 4 cabins at 68 degrees. Identical starting point. Outdoor temperature, 63 degrees. A 6-degree gradient. Enough to matter. No wind yet. The cross-ventilation cabin is essentially idle. Night flush cabin is 1 hour from closing. Thermal mass cabin has been absorbing the cooler night air through a small continuous opening. Shading cabin has been passive all night. The test begins. Noon, first meaningful divergence. Cabin 1, cross-ventilation. 81 degrees. A light breeze has been moving through since 9 a.m. The air feels better than the number suggests. But the walls are warm to the touch. Cabin 2, night flush, 74 degrees. The cabin was closed at 7 a.m. after 4 hours of wide-open flush ventilation overnight. The interior is still carrying the cool temperature from those pre-dawn hours. The mass absorbed it. The structure is running on that stored coolness now. Cabin 3, thermal mass, 78 degrees. The concrete and stone are doing their job, slowing the heat entry. But the outdoor temperature has been climbing since 8, and the mass is absorbing steadily. Cabin 4, shading plus ventilated cavity, 76 degrees. The walls in direct sun on the south face are reading surface temperatures about 20 degrees lower than an unshaded equivalent. The ventilated cavity is actively exhausting hot air through the ridge. 3 p.m., the hardest hour. This is where most passive strategies fail. Solar angle is low enough that even overhangs lose their effectiveness on west-facing surfaces. Outdoor temperature is at its daily peak, and everything the structure absorbed since morning starts conducting inward. Cabin 1, cross-ventilation, 91 degrees. The wind has dropped since 1 p.m. The strategy that worked reasonably well in the morning is providing almost nothing now. The air inside is moving very little. The walls have been absorbing radiant heat for 7 hours. Cabin 3, thermal mass, 88 degrees. The mass is still slowing the entry, but it's now loaded. What it absorbed in the first half of the day is beginning to release inward as the outdoor temperature starts its slow decline. The mass is now a heat source, not a buffer. Cabin 4, shading plus ventilated cavity, 82 degrees. 9 degrees cooler than cross-ventilation at the worst hour of the day. The shading is still working on the roof surface even as the walls warm on the west side. The ventilated cavity hasn't stopped working since sunrise. Cabin 2, night flush, 84 degrees. It's been 16 hours since the flush ended. The stored coolness from the pre-dawn operation is almost fully spent. The cabin is now warming, but from a lower baseline than any of the others. It peaked later and lower than cabins 1 and 3. 7 p.m., the test of inertia. Outdoor temperature has dropped back to 71 degrees. The sun is low. The active solar load is almost gone. This is the moment that separates methods that work with the thermal cycle from methods that only work during the active phase. Cabin 1, 86 degrees. The breeze has returned with evening. Air is moving through the cabin, but the walls are still radiating all the heat they absorbed during the day. Moving the air helps the feeling, but the structure itself is a heat source right now. The temperature inside is higher than outdoors by 15 degrees. Cabin 3, 85 degrees. The mass that slowed the heat entry all morning is now re-radiating. The cabin is warmer at 7 p.m. than it was at 3 p.m. The thermal mass worked as a buffer, but only shifted the problem 4 to 5 hours forward. Cabin 4, 78 degrees. 7 degrees below cross ventilation at this hour. The shading kept the walls cooler all day, so there is less stored heat to re-radiate now. The cavity is still moving air out through the ridge. Cabin 2, 80 degrees. 8 degrees above where it started the day. But the trajectory matters. It peaked at 84 and is now declining. The stored deficit from the night flush is gone, but the structure absorbed less total heat than the others because it started the day colder. 11 p.m., the night flush begins again. Outdoor temperature, 59 degrees. The operator of cabin 2 opens the cabin wide. Both high and low openings. Maximum cross-section for the cool air to move through. The other 3 cabins remain in their passive states, windows at whatever position each strategy calls for. Over the next 4 hours, the night air moves through cabin 2 continuously. Cool air enters low, warm air exits high. The stack effect is reinforcing the flush, because the interior is still warmer than outdoor air. The walls, the floor, the ceiling are all losing the heat they gained during the day. At 3 a.m., cabin 2's interior is at 62 degrees. The other 3 cabins are at 68, 65, and 63, respectively. 6 a.m., the next morning. The second starting line. Cabin 1, cross ventilation only. 69 degrees. Nearly identical to where it started 24 hours ago. The method moved air. It improved comfort during breezy periods. It did nothing to lower the thermal baseline of the structure. Cabin 3, exposed thermal mass, 66 degrees. 3 degrees below where it started. The mass discharged overnight, mostly through the continuous small opening. But it also re-radiated inward during the evening hours. Net effect, modest improvement. The mass is a buffer, not a cooler. Cabin 4, shading plus ventilated cavity, 63 degrees. 5 degrees below the starting baseline. The walls never loaded as heavily, so the overnight discharge was smaller and faster. The ventilated cavity kept working passively all night. Cabin 2, night flush, operated correctly. 59 degrees. 9 degrees below where it started. 9 degrees below the outdoor overnight low, and 10 degrees below cabin 1. The method that requires human operation delivered the largest delta, by a margin that isn't close. Here is the honest table. Method 1. Cross ventilation only. Peak temperature, 91 degrees at 3 p.m. Delta from control, -2 degrees. Time of peak, 3 p.m. Operational difficulty, none, passive. Method 3. Exposed thermal mass. Peak temperature, 88 degrees. Delta from control, -5 degrees. Time of peak, 7 p.m., 4 hours after the solar peak. Operational difficulty, low, requires small overnight opening. Observation, delays the problem, doesn't eliminate it. Method 4. Shading plus ventilated cavity. Peak temperature, 82 degrees. Delta from control, -11 degrees. Time of peak, 3 p.m. Operational difficulty, none. Fully passive once installed. Best passive result, no operation required. Method 2. Night flush, operated correctly. Peak temperature, 84 degrees. Delta from morning baseline to next morning reading, -9 degrees Fahrenheit. Time of peak, 3 p.m., but from a lower baseline. Operational difficulty, on a schedule. Best overall 24-hour result, but only if operated. Now, what the table doesn't show. What happens to cabin 2 if the operator doesn't close it before 7 a.m.? The same path that flushed cool air in at 2 a.m. starts bringing warm air in at 8 a.m. By noon, cabin 2 is the warmest of the 4. The night flush method has the highest ceiling and the lowest floor. Best result when operated correctly. Worst result when operated incorrectly. That is not a small caveat. It's the whole story. If you're someone who wakes up early and closes the house before heat builds, night flush is your highest leverage tool. If you're someone who travels, forgets, or sleeps late, shading plus ventilated cavity is your method. It doesn't ask anything of you, and it delivered the second best 24-hour result with zero operational requirement. One more variable worth naming. These results were measured in a climate with a meaningful temperature swing between day and night, roughly 30 degrees Fahrenheit between peak and overnight low. In a humid climate with high nighttime temperatures and high dew point, the night flush calculus changes. Opening the building wide at night in a humid region can introduce moisture load that raises the effective temperature more than the degree reading suggests. The thermal comfort cost of high humidity can offset the degree gain from the flush. In dry climates with large swings, night flush is even more effective than the numbers here show. The drier the air, the more aggressively the mass discharges overnight. Shading plus ventilated cavity works in both climates. It attacks the problem before it enters. Humidity doesn't change that math. 3 of these 4 methods work. One of them only works if you work it. The combination that beats everything else is not complicated. Shading to reduce the load, ventilated cavity to exhaust what shading doesn't stop, and night flush on the nights you can manage it. Together, they pulled a simulated cabin to 59 degrees on a 90+ degree afternoon. That's not a theory. Those are the numbers from 24 hours of measurement. Before you add a fan, before you calculate what size unit you need, read what your building is actually doing with the heat it receives. Physics doesn't charge monthly. The fix was always there. You just couldn't see it.